Now turning to one of my favorite writers and talking about risk, but really talking about quality decisions. We're going to really get into this with Doug Hubbard. He makes a statement about decision making and risk. I think is really quite interesting. But I want to talk about Annie Duke and her view of improving the quality of decisions, which is very much a risk management function. And so she's very much a behavioral economics, behavioral finance type of person. A lot of it was self-taught, although she's read Kahneman and certainly references Kahneman in her books. So let's look through and see what she has to say, because I think she has some powerful stuff to tell us. So here's the books that I think are worth reading. Peak and Range. Peak talks about dedicated practice with a purpose. If you're going to improve your skills, do it in a way that's actually going to lead to you being improved. And he has a lot of recommendations in there. Range is somewhat of a contrast to Peak. Peak says you can get really great at something if you specialize at it. Range, you can see right in the title, talks about generalists and how generalists can do well in a specialized world. Both of them, I think, have a strong point, strong arguments, and I like both books quite a bit. I think I like Peak more than Range, but they both make good arguments. Every time I've had someone read the word Peak, read the book Peak, they've come back just really pretty excited about what he says. Deep Work, Cal Newport, he has a TED Talk, if you want to watch the TED Talk, where he talks about how to focus in a distracted world, essentially getting more productivity out of your life by getting rid of some stuff that just makes it so unproductive. It's a lot of discussion about social media, but also just uninterrupted time and the importance of that. I noticed that with students. Students tend to be constantly distracted, and it really harms their education and their ability to learn stuff in a deep way. I don't know if many college students actually care about learning stuff in a deep way. It's somewhat of a mentality of I'll just look it up on Google. But I wish we could talk about all three of these books. They definitely have a lot to say that's important, but I want to focus on Annie Duke. Thinking in Bets, you can tell just from the title that she's thinking like a risk manager, but the goal is to make smarter decisions, which again, I'm going to say that's what risk management's all about. You're going to see Doug Hubbard, that decision making is central to what he's talking about, and his whole job is risk management. So if we didn't have to make decisions, there'd be no risk. If we had no decisions, if everything is laid out, there is no risk. So risk comes because we could do A, B, or C, and we got to pick one of them. And which is the best decision? Well, that's a risk decision. So Annie Duke, very good book. So she's coming out of behavior economics and finance. We just talked about with Kahneman. You see that with Thaler and some others. It is definitely becoming a hotter topic. It's something that you would probably want to work into an interview question right now, because it is a hot topic and probably will be one for quite some time. Andrew Lo is another one of my authors. I don't have his book in here. He has a theory called the adaptive market hypothesis, which is very much skewed to behavioral finance and economics, especially at the extremes. When you have markets of extreme fear or extreme greed, you see that normal rational economics doesn't work. I just watched Dr. Lowe, his lecture to MIT, to his graduate school, talking about COVID-19 and what that is doing to markets and to investors, and why we need to understand this side of the human nature, how we handle greed, how we handle fear. So we're trying to get a better understanding of economics, because textbook economics is not the way people actually work. It's not the way markets actually work. It's not the way humans actually make their decisions. So we need something to add into that. And so what do we do? If we know the textbook says we should do A, but we see a lot of examples where people do B, and even after we tell them they have these issues, and the same thing for all of us, we have these biases, we have these problems, and we still make the same mistakes. How can we change our behavior? How can we use the findings to improve decision making and improve outcomes? So So there's Andrew Lowe right there. Thinking Fast and Slow, we've already talked about it. I talked about Michael Lewis and the Undoing Project. I would strongly recommend both of these, all three of these books actually. Adaptive Markets, I think, is a good book, except for his last couple of chapters. I don't think it really fit in the book. It's like he stuck that in there, so a little bit frustrating. If you don't want to read the entire book, he actually has a couple of articles on adaptive markets, which I think covers it about as well as the books do. There are some really interesting things in this adaptive market, especially if you've read um, um, Random Walk Down Wall Street. We talked about Baklev a couple classes ago. Dr. Lowe challenges that idea that markets really are a random walk. Behavioral finance related specific to investing, James Montier has a good book on that. How do you take these teachings that we're getting from Daniel Kahneman and apply it to investing? How do you get around your biases as an investor? We're going to be talking about Doug Hubbard quite a bit. And then obviously right now we're looking at Annie Duke. So we got two great thinkers left. On Doug Hubbard, I'm going to introduce him and then give you a video for you to watch. He has some really great videos out there. He lectures at conferences. And I also am going to talk about some of the stuff that I got directly from taking one of his online courses. Really good course. So thinking in bets. So here's Annie Duke. She was a professional poker player for 20 years. She had really huge earnings in that time. She has written this book, but she also does a lot of talk shows and podcasts. So look her up. She's a very good speaker as well as a great writer. And so she learned a lot playing poker that she thinks applies to decision making and life outside of poker. But the advantage of poker is you're making these decisions in compressed time. So essentially what she was saying is every poker game was like an entire life where she had to make many decisions on the fly, but very quickly, just rapid fire decisions. And so because of that, she believes that she's learned some things that she can really help us. So the statistics of poker, the biases we have, the reasoning errors we make, the strategies to improve them. She says what she learned in poker can actually influence our own lives in managing risk. And she contrasts poker with chess. So you have a chess master. It would be unheard of for a novice to beat a chess master. And if someone loses at chess, they can go back and they can point to a mistake that they made. It's fairly clear. You can go back and see exactly when they made a mistake, and a novice is going to make a mistake from the very beginning. Poker, a novice can win at poker, could beat a master just because they happen to draw a lucky hand. And plus, a beginner, there's so much deception and trying to lead people astray in poker, but a beginner might not have a clue what they're doing, and that might actually be confusing to a novice, and they may not have a clue. You can see that in investing, where retail investors do things that might surprise institutional investors. We'll talk about that some with long-term capital management. So it's a little bit different because you have the human factor in there, and you don't know, just because someone lost at poker, you don't know whether they made a mistake or not. They could have actually made every decision perfectly correctly and still lost. Annie Duke, when she talks about winning her major championship, in the book she admits that the man she was playing against was a much superior player, and she knew it. And so she actually played a strategy that had a low probability of winning, but if she played the higher bet, she would lose to this guy. So she essentially played a strategy that had, if she played the higher probability strategy, she would have lost because this guy was a lot stronger. So she played a lower probability strategy, and she ended up winning at poker. You don't do that in chess. There isn't a higher percentage. There is just a right answer and a wrong answer, and you'll find out when you win or lose. Poker player can make all the right decisions and still lose. Poker involves bluffing and anticipating, so there's a human element there. Thus, poker involves a human factor, not seen in chess. So I bring this back, going back to these earlier books I showed you, peak versus range. You can make a very similar argument here. Peak works really well if you're trying to learn golf. Peak works really well if you're trying to learn chess. But the strategies in Peak don't necessarily work if you're trying to learn tennis or if you're trying to learn poker. So golf is interesting because there's only one player. You're just playing against yourself. So you either hit the shot or you don't hit the shot. Chess, you're either a master or you're not. You make the right moves or not. So I think the contrast in these books is what kind of skill are you building. So Peak applies to certain parts of life that I think it's a really good book, a really good way of thinking about it. Musicians, I thought about it as a musician myself, and the way he talked about how to practice and how to get better made a lot of sense. I wish I'd tried that when I was younger. But finance, I think, fits in this group under range. I think finance is more in this world where generalization. Now, I do tell my students you should specialize, but don't over specialize. Make sure you're studying other areas, giving yourself skills outside of finance and outside of your specific specialty. So we're talking about the human factors. So we're more like in the book of range, where you need to know a lot of things and then be able to make decisions on the fly, but still using good statistics. So we'll get into that. So what is a bet? A bet is a decision about an uncertain future. So that's why she's saying poker and life are very similar, because that's what we do every day. We treat all decisions as a bet, given that all decisions involve some level of uncertainty. There's often a weak connection between the quality of the decisions and the outcome. This is a big thing with her book, the whole idea of resulting. So if you pick this topic to talk about on the final exam, you definitely want to spend some time talking about resulting, and we'll get into that. Luck plays a big role in the outcomes. I think there's some Taleb in here as well, because black swans, and when they hit, they come out of nowhere, and you might just happen to be in an elevator with someone who's going to give you a whole new job, a whole new life. You just happen to pick the elevator that day, or you turn the wrong direction once and have a serious accident or something. There's either way. There's good black swans and bad black swans, and you can say that's luck. You could also say sometimes luck happens, and if you're prepared, you have some control over it. But still, luck plays a huge role in the outcomes. I can go back in my life, just like I talked about with Taleb, and see 2 or 3 or 4 events that were major changers to where my outcome is now. So we'll talk about that. That's true about poker. It's true about all decision making. So we're going to start getting this concept of resulting. We tend to assign decision quality to our good outcomes and bad luck to our bad outcomes. So when we make a decision and it turns out well, we say, wow, look how smart I am. When we make a decision and it turns out bad, we say, wow, I was just unlucky. And we do the exact opposite with others. We assign luck to others' good outcomes, and we determine that it was a bad decision when others have bad outcomes. We assume there's a relationship between luck and decision quality and outcomes, but we tend to do it in a way that really sets up our egos, makes us feel as good about ourselves as we want. So the human ego wants to feel good about itself. So we rationalize our decisions to make us look better and to make us feel better than in comparison to others. So the key to her book is this distinguishing between decision quality and luck in order to improve decision quality. So if the key is luck, but we assign it to decision quality, and we don't understand that, we're going to make a bad decision in the future because we're going to say, wow, that was a good decision. Look what I did. It turned out well. I'm going to keep that particular algorithm going forward. And then you find out it was all luck. You make a bad decision. If we say it was decision quality, we say it was luck when it was really decision quality, then we're going to make the same decision mistake again. We say, well, that was just bad luck. It wasn't a bad decision when it actually was a bad decision. So here's her key recommendations and understanding. So the key we're going to have here is we're going to understand the mistakes we make, and you'll go from the mistakes to her actual recommended approaches to fixing these. And the first one is resulting, hindsight bias, not thinking probabilistically, not recognizing skewing in the numbers, which can be huge. Taleb talks a lot about that. Making decisions in order to protect our egos rather than make a good decision. That happens a lot in finance. Opportunity costs are important. We can't say we made a good decision if there was 3 or 4 other things we could have done that might have been better until we assess it in the whole outcome possibilities. Then we really don't know if it was a good decision. And then motivated reasoning. So we'll walk through each one of these. Today I want to get into resulting, which is her most controversial one. When she does conferences, she used this particular game. This is a Super Bowl game between New England and Seattle. Seattle is on the 5-yard line. Seattle is known for being a good running team. So people are thinking, well, they'll just run the ball. There's 1 minute left, so if they can score a touchdown, a field goal won't help. If they can score a touchdown, then they'll probably win the game. Otherwise, they lose. It's first down, but there's only 1 minute, so time is an issue. Downs may not be that big of an issue, but it could be if they don't get their, if they make 1 yard, 2 yards, and 2 yards, and they're sitting on the 1, and it's fourth down, then downs could be an issue. So if you know anything about this game, you can go look it up. It's a famous game. Here's this team on the 5-yard line with a great running team, great line, great running back. Obviously, they run, try to get the touchdown, but they didn't. Pete Carroll decided to pass the ball. He passed the ball, it was intercepted, and the game was over. New England won the Super Bowl. The next day, in the newspaper, the headlines were "Stupidest call in Super Bowl history." People are questioning, why would you pass the ball when you have this great runner? She walks through the math of it. I've seen that play, and I like the idea of a pass. What I didn't like when you look at the play is the type of pass that they made. It looked like a really risky pass right up the middle. If I would have done a pass like this, it would have been to the corner, so that was either caught or went out of bounds. But so I guess you can question that there's more options than what she talks about. She said the options were you run or you pass, but I think there's a few other options. But I forget how many. I don't know if they had timeouts. They may not have timeouts, but even if they only had one, even if they had one timeout, if they run the ball, the clock's going to keep running. It's going to keep running pretty quickly. And so with the pass, the idea was, well, if you pass it and it's incomplete, you stop the clock. If you pass it and you score, you win the game. But if you pass it and it's incomplete, you didn't really use much time, and you're essentially where you were before, and now you can run it. But people can't say the stupidest call. So what I want you to think about to understand resulting, think about the other side. What if they had passed it and scored a touchdown? What would the headlines have said the next day? Well, then the headlines would have probably said, smartest call in NFL history. Gutsy call. They wouldn't talk about how great the call was. And that's what resulting is all about. Resulting is deciding whether or not the decision was good or bad based on the outcomes. And she's saying that is the worst way to assess the decisions you've made, because luck is so important in the outcomes. And we tend to say, wow, he passed it and was intercepted. I knew that was a bad call. That was stupid. He should have done that. Or he passes it, a touchdown, great decision. I really think, it cannot both be a good decision or bad decision, because, there's a 1% chance there's an interception, and, maybe 60% chance it's incomplete, and maybe, whatever. You've got to look at the actual information you have when you made the decision. And there can be a low correlation between decision quality and outcomes. That's the nature of a lot of the gambles we have in life. She would actually go out and ask people, what was the highest quality decision you made last year? And she wouldn't get their highest quality decision. She would get their best outcome. They wouldn't go back. And she said, your highest quality decision might have been something with a bad outcome. You may have made a great decision, but because of bad luck, it turned out badly. But she said that she never got that from anyone. Everyone always told her that their best quality decision was a great outcome. I bought this stock and it was up 60%. Well, you might have been completely lucky because someone, I remember in our portfolio, we bought Whole Foods. We weren't thinking about Amazon buying Whole Foods, but they did. Well, after that team that picked Whole Foods were talking about the great decision they made, and I'm thinking, well, the stock didn't move much for the several weeks after we bought it, and then suddenly Amazon bought it out. So we were just determining our decision was good, must have been good because the stock price went up so much. So that's resulting. I'm going to stop it there with resulting. I think it's an incredibly important term. how you work this into your life as an investment professional, especially if you're actuarial science, it's a little clearer path than in investing, but how are you going to work that into your decision making, I think, is really critical to your success. So we'll stop it there. In the next class, we'll start here and work through some of her other biases, and then we'll get into her actual solutions.